this is All Minus One Story Time with Bill, continuing with The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. We're in section 1.2.1, The Economics of the Coof. All right, guys, so I gonna keep going with this, and hopefully we can get through this maybe by the end of the month. We'll see if I'm consistent with it. Maybe I'll do more than once a week with it. As the Thursday Storytime segment will be on the Nihilism by Sephram Rose. In any case, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. So we are on the second part of of the first chapter. However, this is delineated. This, our contemporary economy differs radically from the previous centuries. Compared to the past, it is infinitely more intricate, and complex. It is characterized by a world population that has grown exponentially, by airplanes that can connect any point anywhere to another somewhere else in just a few hours, resulting in more than 1 billion of us crossing a border each year. Which is why, stopping an endemic virus is just ridiculous. By humans encroaching on the nature and the habits of wildlife by ubiquitous spawning megacities that are home to millions of people living cheek by jaw, often without adequate sanitation and medical care. And this is the focus, of course, of the UN and the World Economic Forum, is these urban development areas. They don't want to move people out in the countryside and develop more infrastructure outside of the city. They just want to keep people in the city. So it would make more sense to expand people outward, give people more space, have people be more self-sufficient. But that's not the plan. The plan is keep everyone close and see how we can build up and maintain the city, leave the countryside alone. Therefore, it will be taken over again by Mother Earth and Mother Nature, and everything will be joyous. Measured against the landscape of just a few decades ago, let alone centuries ago, today's economy is simply unrecognizable. Notwithstanding, some of the economic lessons to be gleaned from historical pandemics are still valid today and help grasp what lies ahead. The global economic catastrophe that we are now confronting is the deepest recorded since 1945. Well, the one... I don't know what happened in 1945, because we were coming out of the Second World War, and we should have been actually doing sort of well as businesses were deregulated slowly. What we see now, though, again, is just government intervention has created this whole problem. You know, I have a local mall not too far up the road that's basically gone bankrupt. Lots of businesses are going bankrupt, going out of business. I think J.C. Penney's was one of them, which is an interesting story because J.C. Penney himself had a very long history of failure and finally hit success. But that nail's finally in that coffin, I think, for the entire company, or at least a lot of their branches. It says, although it does not rival the calamities and the absolute economic desperation that societies endured in the past, there are some telling characteristics that are hauntingly similar. When in 1665, over the space of 18 months, the last bubonic plague had eradicated a quarter of London's population, Daniel Defoe wrote a Journal of the Plague Year, published in 1722. Interestingly, this pandemic that has a 99% plus survival rate and 94% in the most affected age groups is somehow being compared to something that destroyed a third of the population of Europe. This is an unequal comparison and should not be considered any sort of serious comparison, and it's utterly absurd. All trades being stopped, employment ceased, the labor and by that the bread of the poor were cut off. Again, a good reason why you should be in the countryside, folks, and not in the city where you're dependent upon everybody else. And at first, indeed, the cries of the poor were most lamentable to hear. Thousands of them, having stayed in London till nothing but desperation sent them away. Death overtook them on the road, and they served for no better than the messengers of death. Defoe's book is full of anecdotes that resonate with today's situation, telling us how the rich were escaping to the country. Well, guess what, folks? Today, everybody is rather rich. Even the really poor folk in the United States. You guys live way better than people who live in third world countries who are poor. Trust me. You have air conditioning, you have TVs, most of you have vehicles or some sort of form of regular transportation where it's not manpower like a bike or you're walking everywhere. Now, in some cases it is, but again, I don't think you realize how good you got it comparatively. One of the criticisms I have of Tim Pool, who often says, oh, with poverty, we're comparing it, well, poverty's relative. No, poverty's not relative. That's a leftist opinion. Poverty's not relative at all. Poverty's like, do you have clean drinking water? Do you have like good basic sanitation? Can you go use the toilet? Can you flush? A lot of nations that are first world nations, industrialized nations, don't have good plumbing. You can't flush toilet paper. Do you have basic amenities to survive and not have to worry about your survival because of things like lack of food and exposure to the elements? That, my friends, is poverty. If you don't have those bases covered, you're impoverished. Most people who are in the U.S. that are impoverished choose to be, or they have some sort of mental illness or some sort of mental, like intellectual deficiency. It's not a common thing. And most people choose that lifestyle. Some of them make bad choices that put them there as well. The Brookings Institute, as Ben Shapiro likes to bring up often, says, don't have a child out of wedlock, graduate high school, and get a job and keep it. And basically, your chances of living in poverty are nil. So what are we talking about then with poverty in the United States? We're talking about people don't have as much as their neighbor. We're talking about covetousness, jealousy. We're talking about folks who don't know how to live content because we have a materialistic world. And why do we have a materialistic world? Well, Marxism is our framework. Postmodernist, Marxist type ideas, power, and materialism, because Marx's entire thesis is based around the idea that materialism brings happiness, and the manipulation of material wealth is what is evil in this world. And so from a Christian perspective, it's actually, that's completely wrong. Obviously, Christianity warns about the love of material things and wealth, but at the same time, if you truly understand it, it rejects all materialism. It doesn't matter how impoverished you are, what your station is in life. You should still have peace and happiness. You don't need material things for that. You can live very simply. In any case, let's get back to this text. It says that Defoe's book is full of anecdotes that resonate with today's situation, telling us how the rich were escaping the country, taking death with them, and observing how the poor were much more exposed to the outbreak, or describing how quacks and mountebanks sold false curses. What the history of previous epidemics show again and again is how pandemics exploit trade routes and the clash that exists between the interest of public health and those of economics, something that constitutes an economic aberration, as we will see in just a few pages, as the historian Simon Schema describes. In the midst of calamity, economics was always at loggerheads with the interest of public health. Even though, until there was an understanding of germ-borne diseases, the plague was mostly attributed to foul air and noxious vapors said to arise from stagnant and polluted marshes. There was nonetheless a sense that the very commercial arteries that had generated prosperity were now transformed into vectors of poison. But when quarantines were proposed or imposed, those who stood to lose most, merchants, and in some places artisans and workers, from the stoppage of markets, fairs, and trades, put up stiff resistance. So what is he doing now? What is Klaus Schwab doing? He's saying, oh, well, during the bubonic plague, when a third of Europe was destroyed, nearly half, the people who were rich and had money, the artisans and the merchants of the day, because remember, this happened essentially, the plague happened toward the fall of Rome, the breakup of the Roman Empire, the split between the East and the West, and then it happened again during the Middle or Dark Ages, where there was a lot of transition between governments and there wasn't a lot of technological growth in the European Western world. And then as we came into what we call the Renaissance and the Reformation, all that stuff that went on, people's wealth had gone up because there was more stability, and within that stability there was more of a middle class. And what he's saying is well, but these folks, they were the selfish, evil ones because they just wanted to make money and they resisted. Just like you, who owned your own family business, you're going to have to put up with it because, 0.001% of the population is going to die versus a third. Must the economy die so that it could be resurrected in robust good health? Yes, said the guardians of public health, who became part of the urban life in Europe from the 15th century onward. And again, completely different scenarios. Completely different. And, no one would be asking or arguing about keeping businesses closed if everyone was literally worried about going outside. But when everyone can congregate in Walmart, there seems to be an issue. There seems to be an issue. When children can go to school, there seems to be an issue with this kind of statement that Klaus Schwab is making. And it's like I said, it's a completely unfair comparison. It's apples versus oranges. It is logically fallacious. History shows that the epidemic have been a greater resetter of countries, economies, and social fabric. Well, yeah, like true epidemics, but not this. Not this. This is all government. Why should it be different with the COOF? A seminal paper on the long-term economic consequences of major pandemics throughout history shows that significant macroeconomic after effects can persist for as long as 40 years, substantially depressing real rates of return. Man, makes me want to throw out some foul language there. That is nonsense. 40 years in a planned economy, maybe, not in a free market. Absolutely absurd. That's 2 generations. No. Economies are not that weak, folks. You don't need all this central planning to keep them robust. You actually need those people who would centrally plan and make all the rules to get out of the way most of the time. That's why black markets thrive. Have you ever met a poor drug dealer? How about a poor drug lord? You ever think about why drug lords are more powerful than governments? Now, granted, there's a lot of immoral stuff that goes on there, but I'm just saying, if you want to compare ultimate free markets, that's a black market, folks. And we can look at the drug war. We can look at centuries of history of this. And people who control drugs often had great power and authority within the world. And especially within the 20th century, we've seen this. Governments, including our own, like interventions we had in South America and elsewhere. Of course, we've also helped them out at the same time. Iran Contra, for instance, what's going on right now in Afghanistan. In any case, this is a thing where even the United States can't take on the drug lords. Now we could if we just nuked everything, sure, but that's not a very viable solution now, is it? Guys, black markets will always exist. It's the same argument with weapons or any other sort of prohibition. This shouldn't be a thing. Human beings are free folk. We need to implore them based upon their moral conscience of to do right or wrong. We cannot force folks to do everything. In any case, let's keep going. It says, this is in contrast to the wars that have the opposite effect. They destroy capital while pandemics do not. Wars trigger higher real interest rates, implying greater economic activity, while pandemics trigger lower real interest rates, implying sluggish economic activity. That's not how interest rates work. This is all about who wants to spend, and if the who wants to invest, and if the investment is low, it's because the interest rates are high, and vice versa, right? But when you manipulate the market and you manipulate the interest rate, it's whatever they say it is. And it's been artificially low, at least with the US dollar, for about 30 years now, extremely low. And they just want to keep lowering it. The last time I think we had high interest rates was in the maybe in the 90s, but likely in the 70s, we had very, very high interest rates because we were trying to fight mass inflation right after we got off the Bretton Woods standard. Imagine that. Let's see here. Where am I at? In addition, consumers tend to react to the shock by increasing their savings, either because of new precautionary concerns or simply to replace the wealth lost during the epidemic. On the labor side, there will be gains at the expense of capital, since real wages tend to rise after pandemics. Why would this happen, though, when you're inflating the money supply? Oh, because you're restricting the market, the job market. That's the only reason why. Because you're restricting the pool of workers that can go out in the type of jobs. I don't think real wages will go up. In fact, we were seeing real wages go up under Trump. The average household, I think, went up $5,000 during his presidency versus the less than $200 that it went up in the 16 years prior under Obama and Bush. As far back as the Black Death that ravaged Europe from 1347 to 1351 and suppressed 40% of Europe's population in just a few years, workers discovered for the first time in their lives the power to change things was in their hands, barely a year after the epidemic had subsided. Textile workers in Saint-Ouen, a small city in northern France, demanded and received successive wage rises. 2 years later, many workers' guilds negotiated shorter hours and higher pay, sometimes as much as a third more than their pre-plague levels. Well, when your entire society basically almost collapsed because nearly half of the people died or couldn't work, yeah, the workers who are left are going to have a little bit more value. Guys, this is basic economics. I don't know what Klaus Schwab is trying to sell you here, but if the supply of workers, skilled laborers, is small, they're going to be more valuable. This is basic economic stuff. But Schwab seems to be a Keynesian and, believes in all this leftist centralized control economy nonsense that always leads to massive inflation and impoverishment of the people. It does help the people at the very top, though. The very rich people, they get really super rich. So it's at the expense of everyone else, basically. It's a way to transfer wealth from the poor to the rich, and not in the way that Marxists normally talk about, because Marxists like this kind of economic theory. Similarly, but less extreme examples of other pandemic point to the same conclusion. Labor gains in power to the detriment of capital. Nowadays, this phenomenon may be exacerbated by the aging of much of the population around the world. Africa and India are notable exceptions, but such a scenario today risks being radically altered by the rise of automation, an issue which we will return to in section 1.6. Unlike previous pandemics, it is far from certain that the COVID-19 crisis will tip the balance in favor of labor and against capital. For political and social reasons, it could, but technological changes the mix. Okay, so again, this is all nonsense. First off, we have a problem with a saturated labor market because we have men and women in the labor force. This idea that we don't have replacement labor rates is ridiculous. We could because of the coming automation. They say this out of one end of their mouth, and then at the other time they say, we don't have proper replacement rates, therefore we have to bring in immigrants. No. Two, if we had single worker homes, that is one person in the home working while the other person raised the children, the wages would be higher. As you get more people in the workforce, as I just explained, wages must go down. The other thing that is happening is that younger people are getting priced out of the market because they have no skills, and we have minimum wage propping people up. Therefore, you're seeing more and more older folks working low skill, low level jobs. All of this is engineered and designed for the purpose of basically making you a wage slave, a debt slave. See, if you have to go work at McDonald's when you're 50, 60 years old because you retired from your job and it doesn't make ends meet, and now the minimum wage is $20 an hour, do I want to hire this person that's worked for, 30, 40 years of their life, or some kid who's probably not going to be very responsible and I'm going to have to yell at 50,000 times and then it's going to complain because they got yelled at? Well, I'm going to hire the older person. The end. And the other issue is with the immigrant thing is I'm just getting cheap illegal labor and I don't have to pay taxes on it because I'm going under the table. And so I write it off as some sort of expense here or there, whatever it is. I cook my books and don't pay taxes on that. See, leftism, no matter what it is in economics, just creates about a 50,000 zillion more problems. In the end, if women would stay home, or hey, the man could stay home, whatever. I mean, I'm a stay-at-home dad right now, basically. My wife works from home too, but essentially, if dad stays home, takes care of everything, or mom stays home, takes care of everything, and one person has the income, then there's less people in the workforce, then the wages will go up. The more you saturate the workforce, the lower the wages get. But on the other end of that is the inflation. And we have massive amounts of inflation. This is all the nonsensical Keynesian economics that just you're constantly chasing your own tail. This is very much what the environmentalists do as well. They just chase their own tails and trying to fix the environmental problems. Like, using a helicopter that uses petrol to de-ice a windmill in Texas. Well, if the windmill didn't freeze up, then yeah, we would be getting some cleaner energy. But you have to use petrol fuel to de-ice it and keep it going. So it's like, where are the trade-offs on the back end? What are you actually doing that's green? And it's the same with the economy. It's just this constant loop of the prices get more expensive, the money gets less valuable, more people enter the workforce, your labor gets less valuable, and everyone becomes a debt slave. And it's just the cycle of leftism. In any case, guys, I've run my mouth long enough. That's the end of this portion. Maybe if I have time, I'll get to this next part just to get through it later on today. But I'm going to do these by segment. So if not, maybe I'll get to it tomorrow. I have a few things I got to get done today, so a little busy with other stuff. But guys, with all that said, this has been all minus one story time with Bill. We've been reading The Great Reset, and I hope you all are enjoying and will be well.